The images hung in the air, showing Earth's bloody history. Humanity's long and terrible education in the realities of they argued Earth broke combat rules. Until a human smiled and said, "That's why we wrote our own." The holographic display shifted to show a three-dimensional map of space. Star systems glowed in different colors. Trade routes connected them in delicate lines. It was beautiful and orderly. Commander Ji-won Kim gestured to the map. "This is the Outer Rim region 3 months ago. 12 inhabited systems, 4 council stations, approximately 6 million permanent residents with another 2 million in transit at any given time." She highlighted one system. "This is where Talon's fleet first appeared." They were moving in perfect formation, broadcasting their approach on standard frequencies, following convention protocols exactly. Talon shifted in his seat but said nothing. Minho brought up a new recording. A human voice filled the chamber, calm and analytical. "This is Captain Subin Lee, commander of the human scout ship Aurora. Timestamp is 3 months ago, 14 hours before first contact. We have detected a large fleet entering the region. Configuration matches Vex Cluster military formations. Count is approximately 300 vessels. Main combat class." The recording showed the fleet from multiple angles. Perfect rows, ships spaced precisely, moving at regulation speed. Everything about it screamed official military operation. "We monitored their communications," Ji-won explained. "They were broadcasting on open channels, announcing their presence, requesting rite of passage. Everything by the book." She paused. "Everything too perfect." A new voice came through, still Captain Subin. "Analysis complete. Fleet composition is heavy on assault carriers and light on support vessels. Munitions load is triple the standard for a patrol. Formation is optimized for rapid strike, not sustained operations. Assessment: this is not a patrol. This is a prepped invasion force." Minho displayed tactical data alongside the video. Human intelligence detected several anomalies. The fleet was too large for stated purposes, too heavily armed, moving too deliberately toward council stations. But they were following all the conventions, so officially we had no reason to be suspicious. Vexathera leaned forward, her crystalline body pulsing. "Are you suggesting Talon's people were planning an attack?" "That is a serious accusation." "I am stating facts," Ji-won replied. "What Talon's people planned I cannot say. What I can say is that their fleet was positioned and equipped for offensive operations against council assets." Talon stood abruptly. "We were conducting a legitimate patrol. We had authorization." "From whom?" Elder Kavarn asked quietly. Talon's mandibles clicked in agitation. "From our council. From legitimate authorities." "Which council representatives authorized a 300-ship fleet with invasion-level armaments to patrol near council stations?" The elder pressed. "I have reviewed our records. No such authorization exists." The chamber fell silent. Talon slowly sat back down. Ji-won continued as if there had been no interruption. Captain Subin faced a choice. A large foreign fleet, heavily armed, moving toward populated systems. They were following conventions, so by your rules we should have done nothing until they committed a hostile act. A new recording played. Captain Subin's voice again, but this time addressed to her crew. "If we follow convention protocols, we announce our presence, request their intentions, and wait for a response. That gives them time to deploy, to target stations, to position for maximum effect. If they are hostile, thousands die before we can react. If we do not follow conventions, we can position ourselves advantageously. We can prepare countermeasures. We can be ready to respond instantly if they attack. But we break the rules." The recording showed the captain's face now. She was young for a human, dark-haired and serious. Convention protocol puts civilian lives at risk to maintain honor. Tactical protocol puts honor at risk to maintain civilian lives. I know which one I can live with. The display showed what happened next. Human ships did not announce themselves. They used stealth technology that the Council considered dishonorable. They positioned themselves in places the conventions declared off-limits. They prepared ambushes and traps and false targets, you see? Dralvix called out. They admit to violating conventions before any hostile act occurred. They assumed guilt without evidence. We assumed capability and prepared for threat, Ji-won corrected. There is a difference. We did not fire first. We did not attack without provocation. We simply refused to be unprepared. Minho brought up another recording. This time it showed Talon's fleet from a different angle. And now something else was visible. Behind the main fleet, Masked by their sensor shadows, another group of ships moved. "This is the second fleet," Jiwan said quietly. 200 additional vessels, trying to stay hidden behind the first group. They were not on any flight plans. They were not broadcasting on any frequencies. They were using the legitimate fleet as cover to get close to council stations. The chamber erupted in noise. Multiple species started talking at once. Talon stood again, his body rigid with what might have been anger or fear. "This is falsified," he shouted. "You manufactured this evidence to justify your actions." Elder Kuvarn raised one scaled hand. "Silence." His voice was not loud, but it carried absolute authority. The chamber quieted. "Lieutenant Choi," the elder said, "what is the source of this recording?" Minyo straightened. "Council Station 12's own sensors, Elder. We are not showing you human intelligence. We are showing you data from your own monitoring systems, collected in real time 3 months ago. We simply processed it differently than your automated systems did." "Explain," Kuvarn ordered. "Council sensors are programmed to identify registered vessels and ignore sensor ghosts. The second fleet was using stealth technology that created ghost signatures. Your systems filtered them out as errors. Our systems, built by a paranoid species, are programmed to investigate every anomaly." Jiwan picked up the explanation. "We saw the second fleet 4 hours before your stations did. Captain Subin immediately forwarded the data to Council Command. You can verify this in your communication logs." Dralvex checked his own data tablet, his feathers ruffling in agitation. "There is a data packet from human sources, flagged as low priority by our systems. It was routed to general analysis, not tactical response. Because it came from humans who were not following conventions," Jiwan said. "Your systems deprioritized it because we were operating outside your rules. If we had followed proper protocol, announced ourselves, requested formal channels, that report would have taken 8 to 12 hours to reach someone who could act on it." She gestured to the map. "By then, both fleets would have been in position. The second fleet was heading for Station 12. Population, 200,000 permanent residents, 400,000 civilians in transit." The hologram zoomed in on Station 12. Trade hub, refueling point, medical facilities, one of the most populated stations in the region. Captain Subin had 2 choices, Jiwan said. Follow conventions, which meant announcing herself, moving to prescribed defensive positions, and requesting instructions through proper channels. That would take hours. Station 12 would be defenseless for those hours. Or violate conventions. Move immediately to intercept. Use every tactical advantage available. Prepare for combat without formal declaration. Save time measured in minutes. A new recording played. Captain Subin's voice tight with stress. "All ships, this is Aurora Actual. Emergency combat protocols. We are weapons free on my authorization. Target priority is the stealth fleet approaching Station 12. Ignore the visible fleet unless they engage. Fire without warning. Maximum speed to intercept. If I'm wrong about this, they can court-martial me later. If I am right and we hesitate, 400,000 civilians die." Moving now, the battle played out on the display. Human ships dropped stealth and accelerated hard. They positioned themselves between the hidden fleet and Station 12. When the stealth ships realized they were detected, they opened fire immediately. No warning. No declaration. No convention protocols at all. The second fleet was hostile, Jiwan said quietly. They fired on human ships the moment they were discovered. They fired on ships that were protecting a council station. If we had followed your conventions, they would have reached the station undetected. She let that sink in before continuing. The visible fleet, Talon's fleet, responded to the human attack on the stealth vessels. They moved to engage human forces, claiming we had violated convention by firing without formal declaration. Talon's voice was barely audible. We did not know about the second fleet. We thought humans were attacking without cause. That may be true, Jiwan acknowledged, but your fleet was positioned to support the stealth attack whether you knew it or not. Coincidence or coordination, the result was the same. 2 fleets attacking human vessels that were defending council civilians. The display showed the full battle now. Human ships using every tactic that the council found dishonorable. Electronic warfare jamming communications, false sensor images creating confusion, rapid position changes breaking formation rules, attacks from unexpected vectors violating engagement protocols. And it worked. The stealth fleet was driven off with heavy losses. Talon's fleet, caught between defending themselves and trying to follow Conventi. They argued Earth broke combat rules until a human smiled and said, "That's why we wrote our own." The council chamber filled again exactly 24 hours later. This time something was different. The humans had set up their own holographic display system, larger and more complex than the standard council equipment. Thick cables ran from portable generators. Multiple projection nodes floated at strategic points around the chamber. Whatever the humans planned to show, it required serious technology. Commander Ji-won Kim stood at the center again, but now she was dressed in a different uniform. This one was darker, covered in patches and insignia that told a story most council members could not read. Lieutenant Min-ho Choi stood beside her, a younger human male carrying a data tablet and looking nervous. Ambassador Hyun sat in the observation area this time, watching carefully. His face was unreadable. Elder Kvarn called the session to order. "Commander Kim, you requested this time to present Earth's response to the accusations. The council is ready to hear your defense." Ji-won nodded. "Thank you, Elder. But I am not here to present a defense. I am here to present an education." Murmurs ran through the chamber. Dralvex's feathers ruffled in irritation. "An education? You stand accused of breaking sacred conventions and you speak of teaching us?" "Yes," Ji-won said simply. "Because the conventions are based on assumptions. Assumptions about what war is. Assumptions about how species fight. Assumptions that come from your histories." She paused. "Earth's history is different. And if you want to understand why we fight the way we do, you need to see where we come from." She nodded to Min-ho, who activated the display system. The chamber's lights dimmed. Above them, Earth appeared, rotating slowly. Blue and green and white, beautiful from space. "This is our home," Ji-won said. "Population 11 billion. One species. One planet." The image zoomed down to the surface, showing cities and forests and oceans. You might think that one species on one planet would mean peace, unity, cooperation. The image changed. Now it showed humans fighting humans with primitive weapons, bronze swords clashing, armies marching with spears and shields, cities burning. "You would be wrong," Ji-won continued. "This is from 5,000 years ago. Humans fighting humans. We have been doing this for as long as we have recorded history. Longer, actually. We have evidence of organized warfare going back 10,000 years. More images flashed by, faster now. Medieval battles with armored soldiers, naval warfare with wooden ships and cannons, trenches filled with soldiers using rifles, cities destroyed by bombs. The progression was clear and terrible." Min-ho spoke up, reading from his tablet. "Recorded human conflicts, 14,500. Major wars involving multiple nations or populations, 412. Estimated total deaths from warfare in human history, between 800 million and 1 billion individuals." The numbers hung in the air. Several council members made sounds of shock or disbelief. Vexithera's crystalline body pulsed with confusion. "That cannot be accurate. You are one species. How could you sustain such losses?" "Because we kept reproducing," Ji-won said bluntly. "We lost 100 million in one war and then had 150 million more children. We nearly destroyed ourselves multiple times and we kept going anyway." The display changed again. Now it showed something that made even the battle-hardened species in the council react with horror. A massive explosion, a mushroom cloud rising into the sky. Then another. And another. "These are nuclear weapons," Ji-won explained. "We invented them 70 years after we achieved industrial revolution. We immediately used them to kill 200,000 of our own species. Then we built more. Thousands more. We built enough to destroy our entire planet several times over." The display showed missiles in silos, submarines carrying nuclear warheads, bombers armed with weapons of mass destruction. We came within minutes of launching them multiple times. Minutes. A few individuals with their fingers on buttons deciding whether to end human civilization. Talon stood, his insect body rigid. "This is madness. Your species is insane." "Perhaps," Ji-won agreed calmly, "but we are still here. We survived ourselves." Elder Kvarn leaned forward, his ancient eyes fixed on the human commander. "You said your species took longer to achieve spaceflight than others. This is why?" "Yes," Min-ho answered. "Most species in the council achieved spaceflight within 100 to 200 years of industrial revolution. Humanity took 600 years. We kept stopping to fight each other. We kept diverting resources to weapons instead of exploration. We kept destroying the infrastructure we needed to advance. The display shifted to show a timeline comparing species development. Every other species showed a smooth progression from industrial technology to space travel. Earth's timeline was interrupted dozens of times by wars, by near extinctions, by periods where progress stopped or reversed. Ji-Won walked slowly around the chamber as she spoke. The Galactic Combat Conventions are 3,000 years old. I have read them thoroughly. They are beautiful documents. They speak of honor and restraint, of clear rules and mutual respect, of fighting in ways that minimize suffering and death. She stopped and turned to face the council. They were written by species who went to war a handful of times before they reached space. Species who learned quickly that war was terrible and united to avoid it. Species whose wars killed thousands or maybe millions, and that was enough to teach them better. The display changed again, showing statistics. Every council species and their pre-spaceflight military history. The numbers were tiny compared to Earth's. The Avian Collective, Ji-Won read. 3 major conflicts before spaceflight. Total casualties approximately 4 million. The conflict ended when both sides agreed it was wasteful and unified their governments. Drelvex nodded, his feathers settling. Yes. We learned that cooperation served us better than competition. It was obvious. Talon's people, the Vex cluster, Ji-Won continued. 15 major conflicts over 2,000 years. Total casualties approximately 8 million. Wars ended when a planet-wide council system was established. We are not proud of those deaths, Talon said stiffly, but we learned from them. The crystalline communion, Ji-Won went on looking at Vexithara. 0 major conflicts. Your species evolved with shared consciousness. You never experienced war at all until you met other species. Vexithara's voice was soft. We consider ourselves fortunate in this. Ji-Won nodded. You are. All of you are. She gestured to the display, which now showed Earth again, covered in red markers. Each marker represented a major battlefield. There were hundreds of them. Humanity fought 400 major conflicts before spaceflight. We lost between 600 million and 800 million individuals. We developed increasingly efficient ways to kill each other. We created weapons that could destroy cities in seconds. We came close to extinction not once, not twice, but 3 separate times in our industrial age. She let that sink in before continuing. Your conventions assume that species who go to war will fight honorably because the alternative is too terrible. That assumption is based on your experiences, on histories where a few million deaths were enough to teach you better. Minho brought up a new image. The mushroom cloud again. This is what it took to teach us better. Not thousands of deaths. Not millions. We had to stand on the edge of total annihilation before we finally started to change. And even then, we almost went over the edge anyway. Elder Kuvarn's voice was quiet. You are saying your species is broken. That you cannot be trusted because you are fundamentally violent. No, Ji-Won said firmly. I am saying we are survivors of a different school. You learned from books. We learned from blood. Your teachers were wise elders who showed you better paths. Our teachers were mountains of corpses showing us where the wrong paths led. She walked back to the center of the chamber. You created conventions based on honor because honor worked for you. Because your enemies responded to honor. Because the cost of dishonorable warfare was obvious after a few experiences. The display changed one final time. Now it showed the recent battle. The one that had brought humanity before this tribunal. We created our combat doctrines based on survival. Because honor got humans killed when their enemies had none. Because following rules worked right up until it did not. And then everyone died. Ji-Won looked around at the council members. You ask why we fight the way we do. This is why. We fight like a species that learned every lesson the hardest way possible. We fight like a species that knows rules only work when both sides follow them. We fight like a species that nearly destroyed itself and learned from it. Vexithara spoke, her voice troubled. But if you learned, why do you still fight this way? Why not adopt our conventions if you know war is terrible? Ji-Won smiled slightly, but there was no humor in it. Because we learned something else too. We learned that the universe does not care about your conventions. We learned that good intentions do not stop bad actors. We learned that sometimes the only thing standing between civilization and destruction is someone willing to do terrible things to protect it. She paused, then added, and we learned that lesson by being both the civilization and the destruction. We know both sides. The chamber was silent. They argued Earth broke combat rules until a human smiled and said, That's why we wrote our own. The council chamber stretched 500 meters across, a massive dome of crystalline panels that reflected the light of distant stars. Representatives from 47 species sat in their designated sections, each area modified to suit their particular biology. Some breathed methane, others required water tanks. A few existed as pure energy contained in specialized fields, but today they all focused on the same thing: the two humans sitting calmly in the center of the chamber. Commander Ji-won Kim wore her formal military uniform, deep blue with silver insignia that meant nothing to most species present. Her dark hair was pulled back tight and her face showed no emotion as speaker after speaker rose to condemn her species. Next to her sat Ambassador Hyun Park, older and wearing civilian diplomatic robes, his weathered face creased with concern. The avian prosecutor Dralvex spread his four wings in a gesture of righteous anger. His feathers ruffled as he spoke, his translator rendering his chirps into standard galactic language. The evidence is clear and damning. Humanity has violated the sacred galactic combat conventions not once, not twice, but repeatedly throughout their first major conflict. On the holographic display above them, recordings played. Human ships appeared and disappeared using some kind of cloaking technology. Human soldiers wore camouflage that made them blend into their surroundings. Human commanders gave orders that involved trickery and deception. In one clip, a human soldier actually laughed while firing weapons. Talon rose from his section, his insectoid body clicking and whirring. His species had lost the recent battle badly, and his anger was obvious even through the translator. My fleet followed every rule. We announced our approach on standard frequencies. We formed proper battle lines. We offered honorable combat. And how did the humans respond? With lies, with tricks, with dishonor. His multiple eyes fixed on Ji-won. They used false surrender signals. They hid among civilian evacuation ships. They attacked from directions we could not predict. They refused to meet us in open battle like warriors. Instead, they scattered like cowards and struck from shadows. More recordings played. Human forces had indeed used civilian evacuation routes as cover for military movements. They had sent false communications that confused Talon's fleet. They had pretended to retreat only to ambush pursuing ships. Every tactic violated specific provisions of the conventions. A being of living crystal named Vexithara spoke next, her voice like wind chimes. The conventions have kept peace for 3,000 years. They establish rules that separate civilization from barbarism. They ensure that when conflicts arise, they are resolved with honor and minimal loss of life. She gestured to the display. These humans respect none of this. They fight as if there are no rules at all, as if honor means nothing, as if the only thing that matters is winning by any means necessary. Elder Kuvarn, one of the oldest beings in the council, finally spoke. His reptilian body was ancient, scales dulled by time, but his mind remained sharp. I have read the reports. Humanity was outnumbered 3-1. They faced a superior force using superior technology, yet they won decisively. Talon's fleet was routed with 70% losses. How? Because they cheat, Talon hissed. Because they have no honor. Dralvex pulled up more evidence. We have intercepted human communications from the battle. They discussed tactics that violate 12 separate convention articles. They planned deceptions that violate another 8. They deliberately created confusion that violates the principle of clear declaration of intent. The prosecutor's feathers settled as he turned to address the full council. The question before us is simple. Do we allow this behavior? Do we permit a species that fights without honor to remain in our alliance? Or do we establish consequences for breaking our most sacred rules? Several species voiced agreement. The conventions were ancient and respected. They had emerged after countless wars had taught the galaxy species that some rules made conflict less terrible. Fighting in open formation meant fewer surprises. Announcing attacks meant fewer civilian casualties. Following rules of engagement meant wars ended faster with less total death. Humanity had ignored all of it. Ji-won sat quietly through all the accusations. She took notes on a small device. Occasionally she whispered something to Hyun, who nodded and made his own notes. But she showed no anger, no fear, no shame. She simply watched and listened. Finally, Dralvex turned to her directly. Commander Kim, you commanded human forces in this battle. Do you deny the evidence presented? Ji-won stood smoothly. She was shorter than most species representatives, as humans generally were. but she carried herself with quiet confidence. I do not deny anything you have shown. The recordings are accurate. Our tactics were exactly as you describe. A murmur ran through the chamber. Several species had expected denials or excuses. Then you admit to violating the galactic combat conventions? Dralvex pressed. I admit that our tactics do not align with your conventions, Jiwan said carefully. Whether they violate them is a question of interpretation. Interpretation? Talon's voice rose sharply. You used false surrender signals. That is explicitly forbidden in Convention Article 47, Section 3. We used electronic warfare to create confusion in your communications, Jiwan corrected. We did not surrender and then attack. We made your systems think things that were not true. There is a difference. Semantics, Dralvex declared. You hide behind words to excuse dishonorable behavior. Ambassador Hyun leaned forward to whisper something, but Jiwan shook her head slightly. She remained standing, meeting the prosecutor's gaze steadily. I request 24 hours to prepare Earth's formal response, she said. This tribunal has presented its case. We should be allowed to present ours. Elder Kuvarn considered this. The request is reasonable. We have had 3 months to prepare our accusations. Humanity deserves time to respond. He looked around the chamber. Does anyone object? Talon started to rise, but Vexithera placed a crystalline appendage on his arm. Let them speak. We should hear what justification they offer for breaking our rules. The elder nodded. 24 hours. Commander Kim, Ambassador Park, you will present Earth's defense tomorrow at this same time. Be aware that if your explanation is insufficient, this council will vote on sanctions. Humanity could face expulsion from the Galactic Alliance. Jiwan bowed slightly, a human gesture of respect. Understood, Elder, thank you. As the session adjourned, species began filing out, many talking among themselves. The general consensus seemed clear. Humanity had broken the rules and would face consequences. Some advocated for immediate expulsion. Others suggested forcing humans to follow council oversight for all military actions. A few wanted to ban humanity from possessing weapons entirely. Hyun stood as the chamber began to empty, his face troubled. He kept his voice low. Are you sure about this approach? They want an apology and a promise to follow their rules. We could give them that. Jiwan gathered her notes, her expression calm. They wanted to understand humans. Now they will. They're ready to exile us from the Alliance. They're scared, Jiwan said simply. They've seen recordings of what we did. They've seen that their rules don't account for how we fight, so they're trying to force us into their framework. And you plan to do what exactly? Jiwan looked up at the empty chamber, at the holographic display still showing frozen images of human ships in combat. A small smile touched her lips. I plan to show them why their framework doesn't work. And why ours does. Hyun followed her gaze to the recordings. They're not going to like what you have to say. No, Jiwan agreed, the smile remaining. But they need to hear it anyway. They walked out together, leaving the chamber empty except for the silent recordings of human ships dancing through space, fighting a war in ways the galaxy had never seen before. It draws lines we will not cross no matter what. Your conventions draw lines you hope ever. They argued Earth broke combat rules, until a human smiled and said, that's why we wrote our own. The private council chamber was much smaller than the main assembly hall. Only 12 beings could fit comfortably in the space, which was exactly how many Elder Kuvarn had invited for this closed session. No humans, no observers, no recording devices beyond the official council archive that only the Elder himself could access. The species represented were diverse. Dralvex perched on a specialized frame that accommodated his avian body. Vexthera's crystalline form glowed softly in one corner. Talon occupied a space designed for his insectoid physiology. Young Pix floated in a water-filled sphere, and others, each representing different perspectives and concerns. The last to arrive was Admiral Kretha, whose massive frame barely fit through the entrance. Her species, the Cormac, were warriors by nature, one of the few council races that had fought their way to dominance on their homeworld through strength, rather than cooperation. She was heavily muscled, covered in armored scales, and carried herself with the confidence of someone who had personally killed in battle. Elder Kuvarn waited until everyone had settled before speaking. We are here to discuss what we have learned about humanity, and more importantly, what we do about it. Talon spoke immediately, his voice still carrying traces of the shame he had felt in the main chamber. They embarrassed us. They defeated my fleet. They made us look foolish in front of the entire council. We must establish consequences. Consequences for saving 400,000 civilians? Vexithara asked. Her crystalline voice was neutral, but the question was pointed. Consequences for breaking our sacred conventions, Talon insisted. If we allow this, what stops every species from deciding which rules they will follow and which they will ignore? Dralvex's feathers ruffled thoughtfully. That is a fair concern. The conventions maintain order because everyone respects them. If we create exceptions, we undermine the entire system. But, the prosecutor continued, his tone conflicted, we also cannot ignore that their violations resulted in better outcomes. Fewer total casualties. Civilians protected. Enemy aggression stopped efficiently. Pix's skin shifted through several colors, each representing different emotions in his species. Currently, the dominant color was the pale yellow of fear. You are all missing the larger danger. These humans are not just effective warriors. They are experienced at fighting their own kind. He gestured with one webbed hand. Every other species in this chamber fought outsiders first. We defended our territories from predators or competed with other species for resources. We learned warfare against others. Humans learned warfare against themselves. For 10,000 years, they perfected the art of killing their own species. What happens when they decide we are the enemy? The chamber went quiet. Several members shifted uncomfortably. Elder Kuvarn had been listening silently, but now he brought up a holographic display. I have been studying Earth since first contact. With council permission, I have been conducting detailed analysis of human history, culture, and psychology for the past 8 years. He showed documents that made several council members gasp. Personnel files, battle reports, cultural studies, psychological profiles. The depth of his research was far beyond what most had known existed. I wanted to understand them before they became a threat, Kuvarn explained, and what I found both terrified and reassured me. He pulled up a specific document. This is from Human Military Doctrine, section on internal conflict prevention. It is 400 pages long, 400 pages dedicated to rules, procedures, and safeguards designed to prevent human military forces from being used against Earth's civilian population. More documents appeared. Mandatory psychological evaluation every 6 months for all military personnel. Specific training on when to refuse orders. Legal protections for those who report improper commands. Civilian oversight committees. Multiple redundant checks on weapons authorization. They have more safeguards against their own military than most species have for external defense, the elder concluded. Because they know what happens when military forces turn on their own people. They lived through it, multiple times. Admiral, Kretha leaned forward, her massive frame creaking the support structure. Show them the other document, the important one. Kuvarn nodded and brought up another file. This one was marked with human military insignia. This is called the Restraint Doctrine. It is separate from their combat doctrine. It is taught to every human who enters military service, and they are required to recite it regularly. The text appeared translated carefully. It was a list of principles, each more sobering than the last. Power without limitation leads to tyranny. Strength without ethics leads to oppression. Victory without honor leads to isolation. We carry weapons to protect, not to threaten. We train for war to preserve peace. We remember that today's battlefield becomes tomorrow's negotiating table. Kretha spoke, her deep voice carrying weight. My people are warriors. We are proud of our strength. We fought for 3,000 years to become the dominant species on our world. We understand combat in ways most council species do not. She paused, her armored crest rising slightly. We lost 15% of our population in our last major war before we achieved space travel. It was terrible. It taught us the cost of conflict. It made us value the Council's peace. Humans lost 60% of their population in one of their wars. Not their last war. One of several where casualties reached that scale. She let that number hang in the air. They know the cost of war better than anyone in this chamber. Better than my warrior people. Better than species who have fought for millennia. Vexithara's crystalline body pulsed with analytical light. I have been reviewing the data from the battle. Not just what happened, but how it happened. The humans fought with remarkable efficiency but also with notable restraint. She displayed combat statistics. They disabled 40% of Telon's fleet rather than destroying it. They could have killed everyone. Their weapons technology is more advanced than we realized. They chose not to use maximum force. Their doctrine requires it, Dralvix noted. Minimum necessary force to achieve objectives. Exactly, Vexithara agreed. But consider what that means. They have weapons that could have obliterated Telon's fleet in minutes. They have tactics that could have resulted in total enemy casualties. They have the capability for overwhelming violence. And they chose restraint. That is somehow more frightening, Pix said quietly. A species that could destroy us but chooses not to. How long will they choose mercy? Elder Qvarn closed the holographic displays and looked around at the gathered council members. That is the question we must answer. Not whether humans are dangerous. They clearly are. The question is whether they are dangerous to us. Talon spoke, and his voice was different now. Less angry, more thoughtful. I have spoken with my people who were captured. They told me something I did not expect. They said the humans treated them well, yes, but more than that, the humans seemed to genuinely regret the necessity of fighting. One of my officers reported that his human guard apologized, not for capturing him, but for the fact that the war happened at all. The guard said he hoped that when this was over they could meet again as friends instead of enemies. Talon's mandibles clicked slowly. What warrior thinks like that during a conflict? What soldier sees tomorrow's friend in today's prisoner? One who has fought too many wars, Admiral Kretha said quietly. One who knows that making enemies is easy and making peace is hard. One who is tired of fighting. She stood, her massive frame dominating the small chamber. I have reviewed every scrap of human military communication we have intercepted. Do you know what they talk about during operations? Constantly, repeatedly in every communication? Going home. They talk about what they will do after the war, about people they miss, about places they want to see, about lives they want to return to. They fight like professionals, but they think like civilians who want to stop fighting. Vexithara added another insight. Their ships have interesting design features. I analyzed the technical specifications. Every human military vessel has extensive recreational facilities, gyms, entertainment systems, communication rooms for personal use. They design their warships to remind soldiers that they have lives beyond fighting. Compare that to traditional military vessels, she continued. Most species build warships purely for combat efficiency. Crew quarters are functional, nothing more. The ship exists for war, but human warships exist for people who happen to be at war. Dralvex was silent for a long moment, his feathers settling into a pattern that indicated deep thought. They have convinced me of one thing. Their methods work. Not just work, they work better. Fewer casualties on both sides. Faster resolution of conflict. Better protection of civilians. But, he added, that does not answer whether we should trust them. Effectiveness does not equal safety. Elder Qvarn brought up one final document. This one was not military. It was a human-civilian document, something called the Historical Remembrance Initiative. This is a human cultural practice, the elder explained. Every year they dedicate specific days to remembering their wars. They argued Earth broke combat rules, until a human smiled and said, "That's why we wrote our own." The council chamber remained silent for long minutes after Commander Jiwon Kim finished speaking. The holographic display still showed the frozen battle. Human ships scattered across space in patterns that made no sense to species raised on conventions. Chaos instead of order, improvisation instead of protocol, victory instead of honor. Finally, a young voice broke the silence. Counselor Pix, an amphibian being whose species had joined the council only 300 years ago, spoke with barely controlled emotion. What you describe is horror. What you justify is barbarism. The conventions exist for a reason. They separate us from animals. They make us civilized. The young counselor's skin flushed with color, a sign of deep feeling among his people. If we abandon rules, if we fight like you fight, what makes us different from the monsters we oppose? How can we claim to be better if we become like them? Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Several species nodded or made equivalent gestures. The sentiment was clear. Better to die honorably than live as savages. Ji-won listened without interrupting. When the chamber quieted, she nodded to Minho. "Lieutenant, please call our witness." A communication line opened. On the holographic display, a new human appeared. He was older than Ji-won or Minho, with gray hair and a face lined with age and experience. His uniform was different, marked with insignia that indicated high rank and long service. "This is Security Chief Do-hyun Kang," Ji-won introduced. "He commanded Human Defense Forces for 20 years before retiring. He has fought in 4 major conflicts and supervised the training of 3 generations of human military personnel." Do-hyun's image settled, and he looked around at the council with calm, tired eyes. "Counselors, I am told you have questions about why humans fight the way we do." Elder Kuvarn leaned forward. "Chief Kang, your species has rules of war, correct? Your own versions of our conventions?" "We do," Do-hyun confirmed. "Many of them, actually. More than you have." "Then why do you not follow them?" Pix asked, his voice sharp. "Why do you claim to have rules if you break them?" Do-hyun was quiet for a moment, then spoke carefully. "Our rules are not like yours. Yours are written for how you wish war would be. Ours are written for how war actually is." He gestured, and Minho brought up a document on the display. It was massive, thousands of pages, dense with text and diagrams and protocols. "This is the Human Combat Doctrine. Current edition. It is updated every 5 years based on new experiences and analysis." The document scrolled slowly, showing page after page of detailed instructions, guidelines, exceptions, and provisions. It was overwhelming in its complexity. 10,347 pages, Do-hyun said. "Compare that to your galactic combat conventions." "How many pages are they?" Dralvix checked his tablet. 212 pages. Comprehensive coverage of all aspects of honorable warfare. "We have 50 pages on protecting civilians during evacuation," Do-hyun replied. 87 pages on treatment of wounded. 234 pages on restrictions for environmental warfare. 412 pages on rules of engagement escalation. He let those numbers sink in. "We have more rules than you do. But our rules assume the enemy will not follow any of them." Vexithara's crystalline form pulsed with confusion. "That makes no sense."
"If the enemy follows no rules, why have them at all?"
Do-hyun smiled, but it was a sad expression. "Because the rules are not for the enemy. They are for us. They remind us what we are protecting, what we are trying to preserve, what we refuse to become." He highlighted a section of the doctrine. Rule 1. Force protection extends to all sapient beings not engaged in hostile action. That means we defend civilians even if they are enemy civilians, even if defending them puts us at risk. Another section. Rule 15. Minimum force necessary to achieve objectives. We are required to use the smallest amount of violence that will work, not the most effective, not the easiest, the minimum. Another. Rule 93. Proportional response to threat level. We cannot escalate beyond what the situation requires, no matter how angry we are. He scrolled through dozens more. Each one was a restriction, a limitation, a rule that made warfare harder for humans. We have rules against torture, even when we think it might save lives. Rules against targeting certain facilities, even when they have military value. Rules against weapons that cause excessive suffering, even when they are effective. Do-hyun looked directly at Pix. "You ask what makes us different from monsters. These rules do. We follow them even when the enemy does not. We hold ourselves to standards we do not expect from our opponents. Not because it gives us advantage, because it keeps us human." Ambassador Hyun stood from his observation seat and walked to join Ji-won at the center. He had been quiet throughout the presentation, but now he spoke with the weight of his diplomatic experience. "The difference between your conventions and our doctrine is simple," Hyun said. "Your conventions are agreements. They work because all parties agree to follow them. They are contracts between honorable opponents. Our doctrine is a promise we make to ourselves. It works whether the enemy agrees or not. It is not a contract. It is a commitment to what we refuse to become no matter what is done to us." He gestured to the frozen battle still displayed above them. Captain Subin broke your conventions. She used tactics you find dishonorable, but she followed every rule in the human combat doctrine. She protected civilians first. She used minimum necessary force to achieve that protection. She attempted communication even during combat. She offered quarter to enemy vessels that surrendered. Minho brought up battle statistics. Talon's fleet suffered 70% losses, but only 30% were destroyed. The other 40% were disabled and boarded. Crews were taken as prisoners and treated according to human doctrine guidelines for captured personnel. The stealth fleet, Hyun continued, was offered opportunity to surrender. They refused and fought to the last ship. But even then, human forces attempted to disable rather than destroy when possible. Rescue operations recovered over 2,000 survivors from damaged vessels. All received medical treatment equivalent to what human wounded received. Talon stood slowly. His voice was quiet now, the anger gone. I have spoken with my people who were captured. They reported that they were treated well, given medical care, fed, kept in comfortable conditions. They said human guards were respectful, even kind. He paused, mandibles clicking softly. They said it was confusing, that we had been taught humans were savages. But the savages treated us better than we would have treated captured enemies. Do-hyun nodded. Because our doctrine requires it. Page 4012, section on prisoner treatment. Clear guidelines on medical care, nutrition, housing, and respect. Those rules apply to all prisoners, no exceptions. Elder Kuvarn spoke thoughtfully. So you are saying you have stricter rules than we do. You simply apply them differently. We apply them realistically, Jiwon said. Your conventions require both sides to fight honorably. Our doctrine requires only that we do. Your conventions create rules for engagement. Our doctrine creates rules for ourselves. She walked closer to the council seats. You want to know why we fight the way we do? Why we use tactics you consider dishonorable? The answer is simple. We separate tactics from ethics. How we fight from why we fight. Tactics are about winning. Ethics are about remaining worthy of the peace we fight for. Minho brought up one final document. Much shorter, only a single page. This is the last page of the human combat doctrine. It is the only page that has never been changed since the doctrine was first written. The text appeared above them, translated into each council species language. It was simple and direct. Victory is not the absence of enemies. It is the presence of peace. A war won is only a war delayed if the peace is lost. We fight not to destroy but to protect, not to conquer but to preserve. We remember that today's enemy may be tomorrow's ally, and today's battle shapes tomorrow's possibilities. Act accordingly. Jiwon let the words hang in the air. Earth learned that lesson after losing 800 million people to our own violence. We learned it after nearly destroying ourselves 3 times. We learned it the hardest way possible. She looked at Pix directly. You ask what separates us from monsters, this does. We know what monsters look like because we have been them. We know what happens when you fight without ethics because we have done it. We know the cost of total war because we have paid it. So we wrote rules. More rules than you have. Stricter rules. Rules that apply even when we are losing. Even when following them costs lives. Even when the enemy deserves no mercy. Do-hyun spoke again, his voice carrying the weight of decades of experience. I have killed enemy soldiers who were trying to kill me. I have ordered attacks that killed people. I have made decisions that ended lives. All of that was within the doctrine. All of it was necessary. But I have never tortured a prisoner, never targeted civilians deliberately, never used excessive force beyond what the situation required, not because it would not have been effective. Because it would have made me into something I refused to be. He looked at each council member in turn. That is what the doctrine does.